Want to try and figure out what that hiring manager in your life is thinking? Let us help you try and figure it out. Hey everybody, what's happening? Welcome back to episode 9 of the Game Industry Job Hunt podcast. My name is Joe King. I'm so glad you're with us. Really excited about this episode. In this one, we're talking with my friend Hilary Goldstein. Hilary is a growth marketing expert and consultant. And more importantly, at least for our purposes here, Hilary has offered to come on and sort of talk to us from the point of view of a hiring manager, kind of give us the inside track on what the hiring manager you may be about to interview with is kind of thinking, what they might be expecting, things like that. Just opening up sort of a new avenue for you to think about how you can excel in your next interview. So before we dive into it, make sure to subscribe to the show here on your podcast app of choice if you haven't yet. Leave us a review, follow us on the socials, connect with me on LinkedIn. Just search for Joe King or Game Industry Job Hunt on LinkedIn. Connect with both me and the show there. All right, it's time to chat with Hilary Goldstein. Okay, so we're going now. We're recording now. Yeah, now I'm kind of like, okay, so how do we get this started? But anyway, I guess, in this experiment of making the podcast more conversational, let's just start it here, right? So me and you have been acquainted now for a few months on LinkedIn and kind of gotten to know each other a little bit. And you were nice enough to sort of have kind of a connection call with me at one point. That's sort of the first time we ever sort of spoke face to face, virtually, but face to face. And that was really cool. And that's something that I think we've talked about a little bit on the show in the past, but doing those connection calls, I feel like over the time that I've been laid off has done me a lot of good. It's not anything other than just sort of, it's just connecting. It's just meeting somebody. It's just chatting for 30 minutes. Hey, what's new with you? Is there any way I can help you? Let's just talk, And so, we got a chance to do that, and that was really cool and a lot of fun. And we've just stayed in touch. And so at one point we were kind of talking, kind of to give everybody a little background on sort of how this episode came to be, I guess. You had this interesting idea of doing an episode where we're sort of taking it from the hiring manager's point of view, which I thought was really cool because, I've had some amazing guests on so far that I've been just extremely excited about. But it's been, recruiters, career coaches. We've had some really great, just everyday job hunters like me on, and those have been great episodes, but we haven't really had anybody on yet that sort of spoke to that hiring manager point of view where they're sort of saying, hey, as a hiring manager or someone that's been a hiring manager, these are the things that you should be preparing for and looking for. And these are the kinds of things that hiring managers are looking for. So I thought that was really, really interesting idea. So I'm glad we were able to kind of get this scheduled, but to sort of kick it off and give everybody a little idea about your background, kind of tell us how you got started in games and sort of where you've come from, where you've been, and where you are now.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me. And before I do that, I'll derail your podcast. I've been on podcasts. I was on a podcast when there wasn't iTunes and you had to actually right click and save it on a website. That's old school. So I derail every podcast conversation. So sorry, this is going to be 2-hour long podcast. Well,
I'd rather you derail it than I derail it myself enough. So at least we're going to have some derailment variety here. That's probably good for everybody.
Yeah, I was going to go back to what you said about how we connected the first time, which is something I learned. I left my last job, which we'll get to my history in a second, and I wanted to just do something on my own. And part of that reason is I think what a lot of your listeners are experiencing, which is like the industry is pretty volatile, and there's a sense of you kind of invest yourself in somebody else's world, and you employees tend to have more commitment than employers. Right. And even when you get this sense of like, I'm a family, whatever, people can work somewhere for 10 years and then be surprised, right, that they get let go. And I just didn't want to have that experience anymore. I wanted to have more control over my fate for better or worse, and just not feel like that powerlessness that I think a lot of us feel.
No,
But in
totally.
that process, yeah, in that process, and how I ended up talking to you is and I think everybody feels like a lot of people feel this way. I don't want to sell myself. I think that's really awkward. As a marketer, I like selling other things, but
It's
selling
hard not
myself
to
is weird.
sometimes as a marketer.
Yeah, but so I've never done like a hard pitch to anybody for my consultancy. Like what I actually do is it's just like you. I don't reach out to people going like, "Hey, can I get work?" I mean, obviously, if they come to me, I'm gonna talk to them. But
Sure.
like, I just reach either people that I've known who've worked with me in the past, or I have a lot of people that respond or react to stuff that I post on LinkedIn or that I follow on LinkedIn, and I just honestly just hit people up and I say, "Hey." Like I'm doing my own thing now, and I'm just wondering if you can give me advice because I've seen you talk or whatever. And so I just have a lot of these conversations, and it's not a like, oh, which ones work out or which ones don't. It's really I'm coming at it not from a business side, but like a human side, which is just especially when you are in like a company, right? You get isolated, I think, from the rest of the industry because you're focused on the company, you're doing a lot of work, and there's almost an awkwardness of like
That's
talking to
so
other people
true.
feels like you're cheating
Yeah.
on your
It's so
company.
true. And
Yeah,
then really quick too, just from
yeah,
as a fellow, I don't know if I would consider myself a marketer per se, but as someone that is in the marketing world, community management,
yeah,
social media, my brain always goes to I'm a representative in a very, very real way of whomever
yeah,
I'm working for. Should I be saying this? Should I be saying that? Is this a thing that I need to weigh in on? Is this a
yeah,
thing that could come back to bite me later? And I have found too, just like you, I think that, in the times that I am in between roles, I am a lot more active and I'm posting and I'm creating things and really out there. And that helps me find the next role. And then I find the next
yeah,
role and that declines a lot. So that's sort of
yeah.
a little personal goal for me, at least with this podcast, is to not let that happen when I do end up starting something new. But anyway,
Yeah, and you
yeah,
and I would say you don't have to go into it with the intent of like, oh, I'm gonna get fired from my job one day, and so I got a network. But it is, do you want? I mean, if you keep these relationships warm, right, and just people aware from you, because how awkward is it when you get let go to start hitting people up and like, hey, man, I lost my job. Can you give me some
yeah,
help? But
it's
if
been a
it's more
while.
like, hey, it's yeah, but if you're like, oh, you remember we talked a couple of months ago? Well, I was worried that the job was going to have layoffs. Well, they did, and like you want to have a chat. Like it's just easier. It's sort of like if you need money right in your life and you go to like a relative, and you're like, I know we haven't spoken in 4 years, but I'm like, can I borrow some
Long lost
cash?
uncle.
Yeah, versus the one you're like, oh, yeah, it's great to hear about your daughter's graduation or whatever, and like, hey, I'm kind of in a tight spot. Like, so it's just, you should always be thinking that because I think the last 2 years in the industry has proven that there's no unless you're an executive, there's no security
Right.
in jobs, and you have to, be aware of that. And it's an unfortunate thing, but it's the reality we're in right now. And so don't start from zero if something happens. Like be ready and it's just a human thing, right? It's
For
not just a
sure.
business thing, like it's a human thing. Like it's a lovely industry. There's a lot of great people you can meet and keep relationships with. Just have like human talks and like ask people for advice even while you're doing work.
Yeah.
And they'll keep you in mind when something else comes up.
That asking for advice too is a really underrated way to network. And I feel like, this conversation that we've sort of found ourselves in here about networking and about as you say, keep the relationship warm. That's a great way to put it. And I feel like we have probably touched on this somehow in each of the last, I mean, maybe every episode, honestly, now that I think about it. We're on episode 9 now, and I think probably every episode, something to this effect has come up of, network, but keep networking. Don't stop when you find something. Keep going. Keep being involved and building relationships. And I think that I think the idea of asking for advice is a really underrated way to do that. That's sort of another thing we've touched on recently is how networking can be a little awkward, especially for some people that are more introverted, things like that. And you're kind of like, what do I say? What do I say when I reach out to this person on LinkedIn? Like, hey, how's it going? And it's weird, but I think that approaching it that way of, oh, hey, maybe we're peers, maybe you're more senior than I am, you've got more experience than I do, but it's always good to learn from what other people are doing, regardless of those sort of seniority type levels or issues. And I think that's a really good way to to sort of broach that conversation of, hey, I'd love to talk to you. And frankly, that's how I've done it in several
Yeah.
of my sort of connection calls is it's been oh, hey, I'm, starting a consultancy. I noticed that you've been doing that for a while or whatever. Can you sort of just share with me your journey? And, even asking for advice, or for me, that one was kind of that was sort of the touchstone question was, can you share your journey with me? Kind of how did you get to where you are in consulting or marketing? Or a friend of mine, John Steven Stansel, who's an amazing social media manager, really well known in that world, and we had never really connected in that sort of having a call, and chatting. And so we did, and that was awesome. And it was just sort of that same kind of thing, like, hey, we've known each other for a while, but I've never really gotten a chance to talk to you and see what kinds of things I can learn from you. And so we did that, and it was really cool.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would give one more piece of advice before we can talk more about me, which my favorite subject. But the last thing I'd say is that the other thing, even when you have a job currently, like I would ask people for their opinions on stuff. Because, so as an example, or let's say you're looking for a job. Right now, I think you're looking for a job, you're doing resumes, you're throwing stuff out there, you're like, why are these people calling back to me or whatever it is? Or can't land a job. But what I would do is if you're in the industry, you have a friend, it doesn't have to be in your discipline, right? Maybe you do QA, but you were really good friends with like a community director or whatever. Somebody who's a hiring manager. Like I would go like, hey, do you mind if I send you my resume, right? Like, could you just give me feedback? Because imagine you were trying to hire me. You don't have an open role, but just imagine you were trying to hire me for a role. Like, is there anything in my resume that I could change? And then also like, hey, can I talk to you? Because I want to understand what parts of my experience like would interest you to hire me. So you're just using people, and people want to help. Like, I don't know anybody in
Absolutely.
this industry who is like, has no empathy for what everybody is going through. So I think you'd be surprised how many people are happy to get on a call and just chat with you. But like, it's good because I think people are sending out like 100 resumes, and maybe you get a handful of interviews and then they don't actually lead to anything. And I think everybody starts out and head is like, oh, my resume must be bad. Something's wrong. Like, is the formatting dumb and that's what's causing it?
Right.
Or like, oh, what am I saying wrong in these interviews, or what's happening? And like the easiest thing is like go find people and just ask. Like hiring managers, like I'm doing this podcast because I've heard some of your other ones, and when we first talked, I was like, like the hardest thing when you are interviewing, I think for me, is everything you do is in a black box. I send my resume into somewhere. There's no feedback. The feedback is either like you want to chat or you never hear from them again, right?
Right.
And then you have the interviews. That's also in a black box. So you don't really understand like how they're feeling about you, what they're looking for, how many people are in the mix, right? What level of choice you are. And so hearing from hiring managers, I think, can help you go, okay, let's pull back the veil. But you can do that on your own independently with people who manage other people or who hire. You're going to say, hey, what would you recommend on this stuff? Like, I just wouldn't be shy about it, because it can also give you comfort. Like, they say, dude, your resume is awesome, your history is awesome, what you do is awesome. Like, I wouldn't change anything. Then you're just like, yeah, well, trying to find a job sucks.
Yeah.
So it just
Then
comes down to that. Yeah.
Yeah. Then and I felt like this was a lot of this has been a lot of the thing for me over the past several months is, I do feel like my resume is good. I am getting callbacks, here and there, not every single time, but I mean, at probably a decent rate. I mean, if I were able to kind of go back and see the data, so to speak, on my job hunt, it'd probably be okay. And yeah, for me, it's kind of come down to the belief that it's just the market. The market is so just saturated right now with incredible talent that it really makes it hard to stand out, even when you've got, great experience, you've worked at great companies and on great titles and done awesome things. There are lots of people out there that have done that too. And so, yeah, I agree completely. For me, getting resume help was really tough as far as sort of, it felt like another way of kind of really putting myself out there. And I felt really vulnerable doing that. But I do think I asked a handful of people over the past several months, hey, what do you think of this? And it was sort of, yeah, no, it's, you're on track, you're on the right track. And that's all, that is good to hear, because then it's not an issue of, being one of those people that's applied to hundreds of things and you're not hearing anything. And that's not a good feeling at all. But as far as your background goes, where did
Yeah.
you come from?
Yeah. Where
Where
did
did you come from anyway, man?
Man, I've had a lot of people ask me that question. Where did you come
Where
from?
did you come from?
Yeah, I was at Netflix when it was first starting. So I was one of the founders of Netflix. I was just in
So
customer service.
DVDs,
Uh,
back in
yeah,
the DVD days.
not that extending. I was on the call center in the early days, and I got laid off, and then like a month before 9/11. So I was
Oh,
just like
wow.
couch surfing at my parents' house, and that whole thing happened. And then I was just like, well, what am I? It's one of those like moments where you're like, oh, what am I doing with my life? And so I, play a lot of video games. I just was on IGN.com, and they were like, oh, we're looking for unpaid interns. And then my head was like, I hope nobody in government is listening to this right now. My thought was like, well, technically the government is paying me, right, to be on unemployment. I'm like, so I could work to IGN for free, and the government's basically subsidizing my internship.
Totally.
So I interviewed there, got a job. Like 2 months later, one of the editors left to go into PR, and so they just hired me. And then I worked there for like 10 years, worked from intern to editor in chief, running the show. And then I just wanted to go do the other side of stuff, which a lot of media has done, certainly from my day and age, because more money, different kind of stress and workload. And so I went on the publishing side, and then I mean, everybody hates hearing this, right? But it is a relationship game, like a lot of the time, because the way I got my first, I was doing contracting, but the way I got my first real role was at Chair, which is part of Epic Games in Salt Lake City. And I just had built a really good relationship with one of their co-founders and the creative director, Donald Mustard, who, if that name sounds familiar, he was the creative director for Fortnite, so he definitely knows his stuff.
I think I've heard of Fortnite. I think I've heard of that. Yeah, it sounds familiar, vaguely familiar.
Yeah. And he made Shadow Complex. You remember that game? It was one of my favorite games of all time.
I was actually, when you said Chair, actually when I was prepping for this episode and kind of digging through your LinkedIn, and I was like, oh man, he worked at Chair. Nice, that's awesome. And then I thought, what was that game that came? Shadow Complex. Oh yeah, that was a really, really fun game. Really fun game.
Yeah. So they so we I don't know, say it helped out, but I did a bunch as an editor for that game. I believe in that game. And so we did some extra features for it. And then they showed me Infinity Blade before they showed any other media and stuff like that. So we just, and like every time we'd be at GDC or some event, he would always be like, hey, you want to grab dinner? So we were just friendly. And they needed a community manager, which I had no experience or idea what I was supposed to do. And so that's how I got the job, because they're just like, that's a lot of times it's like, oh, I know and have comfort with this human being. I know they'd be good to work with. So, skills can be learned, I think is what a lot of people say. So that's how I got that job. And then time and place is good. I lived in Salt Lake City, and EA had a studio in Salt Lake City, and they could not find a marketer there. And so the recruiter said, like, you're the first, we've been looking for 6 months and nobody will move here, and you're the first qualified person we've talked to. And it was like, oh my God, I can make more money.
You are a unicorn. Look at this.
Yeah. So that's why I got that one. And then like EA moved me around the country at a bunch of different studios. And once you have EA on your resume and a bunch of experience, then I moved to Scopely, which is another big company. And then my last stop was at 1047 Games, which makes a game called Splitgate. Just came in there as like the engagement director at first, and then got promoted to the head of marketing, and did that for 2.5 years. And then, my time was up, and it was just time to go do something else. And I just felt like, it's hard to find a job in this industry, and I didn't want to be unemployed and just looking. And so I was like, even if nobody hires me as a contractor, it doesn't change me looking for a job every day. So I'm like, I might as well see. And I'm not saying it was easy, but it was fast. And that's because the relationships I built, the way that my first month was all about, it's really hard. If anybody's considering doing consultancy, I think the hardest thing is like, what makes me unique, and how do I sell myself? And actually being in a job interview is not that different, right? You got 20 other people that might be in the interview. What makes me unique? So to learn how to sell myself, which I thought was really hard, I would just talk to people that I had good work relationships with, right? And who knew me, and I would just have catch-up calls, but then I'd be
Yeah.
like, hey, like what would you say was made me unique from all the other marketers you worked for? Or like, how would you I sometimes I would pitch them kind of like the log line of my agency, and they gave me like real feedback, and what I thought from how I need to package myself was different than the way they described me. And the the conversations that were the most joyful, the things I liked the most, I was like, oh, why am I not trying to market myself to the thing that I light up whenever I talk about these things? And so that's what helped me pivot. So real again, it is these conversations with people you've had work experiences with, like don't take them for granted. People will chat with you for sure.
Yeah.
One, because everybody else knows they're going to be in that situation one day, and they're going to want to call on you. So
Absolutely.
it's reciprocal, you know.
Yeah, and talking about setting yourself. We've also talked a lot of here on the show about setting yourself apart, and that's a great example of that context of sort of starting to get into consulting and things like that. Which again, we've talked about my dipping my toe into that personally, and I had a really hard time with that same thing for a long time. And then I got a chance to have a conversation with Chris Tran, who is a really great career coach, and he's really active on LinkedIn. Some of you guys listening may know who Chris is, and I'm hoping to get him on as a guest here pretty soon. But I had a great conversation with him, and he sort of framed it like, make yourself the blank guy.
Mm,
Like if someone says we need someone who specializes in blank, like frame yourself as the blank guy. So then they're going to say, oh, we need somebody that specializes in community engagement and great events and giveaways and things like that. Oh, you want to talk to Joe King,
yeah,
or like growth marketing, these kinds of things. Oh, you want to talk to Hilary Goldstein. That's what you want to do, is figure out that what's that blank, like you're the blank guy, the blank gal, whatever it is. And it can't be like, because I tried this on him and he was like, no, that doesn't count. It can't be like strategy or social. Like it can't be really
yeah,
broad. You really want to niche down. And you said it great. Like, what makes you light up when you talk about, what part of what you do makes you light up when you talk about it? I think that's a great way to sort of gauge how you can be the blank guy or the blank gal. That's key, I think. And when he told me that, it sort of clicked. And then from there, I sort of
mm,
started thinking for several days, a couple of weeks, something like that. Okay, like what am I? What's my blank? I'm the blank guy. What does that mean? And then I think I settled on some, some like engagement based things and really drill down into that, and that helped a little bit. No, I mean, I totally get where you're coming from on that. And look, I have a browser window open right now on Shadow Complex, and it's just blast from the past, dude. I'm telling you, we were talking a little bit before we started recording about my first podcast. You guys, it's not even really up anymore, I don't think, because we stopped paying the hosting fees years ago. But it was called Video Game Book Club, and so we would
oh, cool.
essentially talk about, the idea was to play a game and then talk about it like a book club, basically nothing super, revolutionary here, but we played Shadow Complex once. And I think we had an episode, we either had a whole episode about Shadow Complex, or we talked a lot about Shadow Complex in an episode because it came up somehow and we sort of went down the rabbit hole, and it was really good. But yeah, man, 9.4 out of 10 on IGN. So I don't know if you had anything to do with that or not, but it's pretty good.
I think I did that review, so
Yeah.
that's what I have to do with it. I think I gave it the
You're like,
9.4.
I love this
So,
game. Um, like we sort of said earlier, you and I talked, we're getting to know each other, and you had this really great idea, this great thought of, hey, let me come on, sort of talk about the hiring manager, the point of view, and, let's sort of address that. I thought that was great. So just to sort of ease us into that part of the conversation, I'd love to hear any general reflections you might have on having hired people in the past. Like, was there any particular process or frame of reference you sort of worked from as you were interviewing candidates and hiring? Or was it like, I'm just kind of going on the feel? It's like, okay, the feel, like, I like this person. Okay, are they qualified? Yes. Okay, then we go from there. Or kind of like, what was your internal process like in that regard?
yeah, so I mean, every company I think has a different approach, but I will say, and no, nobody wants to hear this, but hiring people is really hard. I know getting a job is very hard, but hiring people is also hard. And actually, I
Yeah.
think hiring people now is harder because when I was at 1047, if I posted, "Hey, we're looking for a community manager," like in the past, like I've looked for that stuff at like EA and stuff. In the past, like I might get like 50 applications, right? I can get 5,000, and I'm not kidding you. I think when we looked for a graphic designer, we got 5,000
I totally
applications,
believe
right?
it. 100%.
Which
Totally believe
and
it.
so, and a lot of them are junk, right? People are just throwing stuff out there. So there's like people who are just like, hey, yeah, I'm like a waiter and like I've never used Photoshop, but would you hire me? So you have to, like,
I'm trying to
unfortunately,
get
one thing
into it.
is, yeah, I mean, there's too many people. So, and as examples, sometimes you're just doing bulk ways to like sort through stuff. And so when people say have the right keywords in your resume, I mean, when it's 5,000 people, I'm literally typing in the things that I'm like, can filter out for it. One of them being games, because a lot of people will apply who don't have games experience. I'm like, well, let's focus on games people first. So it is important to make sure that's in your resume because I'm not using some fancy tool. I'm literally just, this is something basic in Greenhouse where I'm just like, which is a tool for applications. And
Right.
I'm just going like games and like I might look for something else like maybe I want people who were indie or who ship some certain types of titles. And I'm just putting in a couple of things and then it filters out a bunch of stuff. And it's not like they're trash. It's more like if I got 5,000 people and I can narrow it to the
Right.
100 that I know already fit my look, then I'm going to start there. And if none of those fit, then I'll broaden it out. So
Yeah.
it is really important more now than ever. But it is really hard to hire people. And I mean that from, there's a lot of applications, but I think about when you think about it from the hiring manager's perspective, right? So I've obviously interviewed and had to get jobs, right? And it's hard because again, you put it in a black box where you don't know what they're really thinking and who else they're talking to. But from a hiring manager's perspective, I have maybe like in a really rigorous interview process, maybe 6 to 8 people talk to you. They look at your resume, which generally like I don't really regard resumes much. That might be different than other people. And like you're trying to assess so many things, right? One, can they do the work? And think about it. Unless I'm giving you like an art test, which is like or a coding test, which is like very direct. I know exactly like if you're good or not. But like marketing, community management, like look, I hate to say this, but there's a lot of people in like these disciplines are full of crap,
Yeah.
right? And
Yes.
so like there's a lot of people who I've worked with and I've seen their LinkedIn and they're like, oh yeah, I shipped this game. And I'm like, well, they brought you in for like a week for like a
Yeah.
brainstorm, right? And so people ship a lot of stuff they don't do. And so you're trying to assess if somebody can actually do the job of marketing basically based off their experience. I think that part is hard anyway. And so a lot of people get hired wrongly because it's just hard to tell. And you're trying to go culture fit, right? Meet our team. Is this person going to be cool to work with? But again, maybe at best it's like 2.5 hours of conversation to come to like, out of all these people, this one's going to do it. And so
Yeah.
you hire a lot of the wrong people. And that's very stressful. And then, the negative part is, and this is even before this current period of chaos we're in right now, but I've had stuff where myself, I'm the hiring manager, my team, everybody is like, they want somebody. And I'll be frank, like an executive comes in after their 30-minute call, is like, I don't know. And they don't have any real reasoning. It's just like, my gut is just like, they don't seem right or something stupid.
Yeah.
And they're the boss and you can argue all you want, but sometimes that person wins out. And so you might get really far and really even get the assurance of like, we love you. You just got one more checkpoint. This guy, it'll be nothing.
Yeah.
And everybody wants you, but somebody who doesn't really do the work, like just has some random idea of why or some bias. And you feel like, oh my God, my dreams are crushed. Like, why didn't I get this? And it isn't because they didn't want you. It's because like, look, there's a bunch of shitty executives in the games industry.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we're in our predicament, right?
Right. Yeah.
Uh, like I think I just saw right there's financials coming out right now from like EA and a couple others, and they're like, "Oh man, we had to change our forecast. Even Nintendo lowered their forecast, and like we were wrong." And I'm like, "Well, why doesn't anybody blame the people who are doing the forecasting,
Right.
right? Maybe they just forecasted wrong, and it was always going to be this way."
Yeah.
And there's a whole other political reason why things get forecasted the way they do and then don't get met. But you suffer the consequences, right?
Mm-hmm.
They didn't hit the numbers that they promised that they could never hit, and now they've got to improve the margins. So, okay, they just randomly go, we got to get rid of 40 people.
Mm-hmm.
What are the 40 people, right? And that, a lot of this stuff is just unfortunate. So, you know, try not to take it personally when you don't get a job because it's hard for us as hiring managers to like determine like who's good and who's not. It doesn't mean you're not good. It just means we might have had a bad assessment, right? Or something out of your control that's stupid is what blocked you. And so it is hard on us to even find the candidates. But I think interviews are really hard. And then the part of that, to go back to your question of like the process, a lot of times I wouldn't control the process even as a hiring manager, because the bigger companies, they all built usually a process. And so I've had some that are really rigorous and good, where they take, maybe they have five like principles of the company, and they'll actually give each person who does an interview like a different principle to focus on. So they're not looking at experience. They might just be like, my job is, we believe in teamwork, right? It makes the dream work, or whatever. So my
Right.
job is to ask you questions that understand how well you work with others. I think that process works pretty well, because, or at least actually trying to get to something tangible of like, does this person have some quality that we need here? But then some have just been, and even for big companies, are just like crapshoots. When I worked at EA, the interviews were just like, they didn't have any focus. My memory was, it was just sort of like, yeah, go find people and have this many people interview them. So sometimes it doesn't have structure. So to me, the one that I prefer is, well, I really like the principles one, because you give people focus and it avoids redundancy, right? So if you've been in interview cycles where everybody starts with like, so tell me why you chose this place, or like, tell me your history. And so you spend 10 minutes out of your 30-minute interview rehashing stuff that's already in their notes and not getting to explain why you're unique. So that stuff frustrates me. So I do like that when you do it break up like that. But then the things that I'm looking for, like me, it's thought. And that's because I'm from the marketing end, right? Again, if I was hiring an artist, I mean, I just look at the portfolio or have them do an art test, and that
Yeah.
immediately tells me a lot. But
Right.
these are very soft skills. Joe, you have a lot of soft skills, right?
Right.
In your role. And all I can do is, in those areas, is I just look for the way you think. So I want to ask you questions that I don't really care. Like, I have your resume, so I don't technically care like all your process and how you got here. I think that's a waste of time. It's more, okay, you're going to be in this situation one day, especially as a community manager. I would ask a community manager as an example. I just say, okay, we've had a toxic environment in our community in the past, and we've worked to bring that down. Can you tell me a time when you've worked with like a toxic community member, and like what have you done? Like, give me the instance and tell me how you resolved it, and what you learned from that. And it's not about, it's just me understanding your thought process, right? Why do you do the things you do? Because at the end of the day, I just want to know, oh, this person can think. So I'm sure you're going to ask me what I look for. So I'll say, in any role, number one, curiosity, right? I will
Mm.
say, if you don't ask any questions when they say, "Do you have any questions for me?"
Yes.
You're not getting the job.
That's a yeah. You guys
Yeah,
listening, definitely make sure you have some questions, and also make sure they're good, thoughtful questions. Like, any questions are better than
yeah,
nothing, I think. But people interviewing, like we're saying, you might interview dozens of people for one role, and I'm sure the question, so tell me about the culture, or what's the culture like, is everybody asks that. So that's one for me. I tried to find, kind of creative ways to sort of figure out what the culture was like and have them tell me what the culture was like without asking, hey, what's the culture like? So be thoughtful about your questions. And look, I mean, when you have a really good one, write all your questions down. That's one thing I did in my prep for every interview. I would write down, here what I want my questions to be. And then sometimes I
yeah,
would go back to old questions from other interviews that I thought fit well. Like, one question that I think I had was, something to the effect of, rather than asking them, how does the company approach work-life balance, you could ask something like, how does the team handle busy times? And what's the process like for, blah, 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 whatever related to busy time. So basically what you're asking is, are you going to make me work ridiculous hours? You know what I mean? That I shouldn't have to be working, based on the law of human decency, or or is there a support system here? I mean, for me, I'm a parent, as are you, I think, and
yeah,
that kind of thing that's really important information for me to have. Like, if my kid gets sick and I come to you at the last minute one morning and say, hey, my kid's sick home today, so I'm going to be in and out for the day. Are you going to be pissed at me and be weird and catty about that? Or is it going to be like more of a, hey, no, take the day, do what you got to do. Let me know if you need anything. That's the way to me a manager should be. So yeah, always come with questions, but again, don't just Google good job interview questions. Like, be thoughtful and think about the things that really, really do matter to you and your specific instance, like that. Like if you're a parent, some question like that, figuring out what work-life balance is like there is important,
Yeah. And I would say, approach the questions like, just assume you've already got 3 job offers and you're asking a question to go, I have 3 jobs to choose from, and these questions are going to be what decide it. So when you say culture, I would say, do you know what culture, what is good work culture to you? So for some people, it is like, we don't work like extra hours or whatever. But for some stuff, it is like, I want more independence, and I don't want like managers who come in and like screw up stuff I do. But if you list the qualities that you think make a good culture, then your questions are just about that. So if for instance, I don't like what managers, people from outside of what everybody's doing, come in at the last second and have like chaotic, like, whoa, we should do this, and everybody's scrambling, because that does make you work more. Mm-hmm. So I just ask like, hey, like what kind of situations do you have where you ever have the kind of situations where you guys have done all the work and the planning, and then somebody comes in with like a great idea and you guys have to spin your wheels really quick? And if that happens, like how do you combat that? Because those things are going to tell you like, oh, is this place I want to work? And I get it. We're all right now, a lot of people are desperate for jobs and just like, I'll just take whatever I want. And that is fair. Like we all got to make our bread, but you should know what you're getting into and accept it. And maybe you try to push for more money if you know this is not the best culture or job for me, right? Maybe I have to work more than I would want to, or the manager sounds like sucks. Well, then I would set my expectations for salary like higher to say, well, I'm at least going to get some extra bread, like if I'm going to deal with this, instead of like, I'll just take whatever they give me. So yeah, I think all of that just helps you inform your opinion, but also how you approach work day one, because you're going to know. The last thing I'd say though on culture is pay, you're focused on like, I gotta give this awesome answer, but listen, because the questions they ask you is going to tell you the culture of the company. Think about Absolutely. It. If like I'm like a very empathetic, like human person, and I want to understand the quality of the person that's gonna work with me, because I just have like a no jerks rule. Generally, I try to enjoy it in life, and so like
it's a good rule.
So like if they're like very like, I want hard numbers and I want to tell me all the results. Well, that's going to tell you a little bit about their focus, right? And then when you're working at the job, like no matter what you do, you're going to have KPIs in hand, and you're going to have to probably be explaining why things didn't work out the way they did, which is totally fair. But if they don't ask you any human questions at all, right, then I would say that's probably a manager who doesn't really care that much about the things like, hey, I need flex balance, right, in my life because something happened, because they don't sound like somebody who would take an exception. They sound like they're like, I just want the results and I don't care about your actual life. So yeah, just hear them too, because their interview questions will ask stuff. But again, never forget, nobody knows what they're doing, and interviewing people is hard. And a lot of people have really bad interview practices. So there is that you'll just get lame interview questions, and that's just how it is. But yeah.
That's a pretty good segue into here's kind of an interesting question. I don't know if you feel like this might be a curveball for you or not, but without naming any names, of course, speaking of bad processes, good processes, whatever, do you have any crazy interview stories that you think are worth sharing? So whether it's a cautionary tale, something cool someone did that stood out to you, maybe just something funny, unusual, and it could be specifically from the point of view of a hiring manager, but also just in general. Everybody loves a good interview story. So,
yeah. Well, first I'll tell one that won't relate to most people, but it's my favorite interview story because it happened to me, which was when I was leaving IGN and I was trying to get jobs. I went into a publisher, and I won't say which name, but I'll say that it starts with a U and they're French. And the first interview, this guy comes in with several sheets of paper that are highlighted, and he just puts them in front of me. He's like, so you reviewed, I don't even remember which game. He's like, you reviewed this game and you only gave it a 6.5. And he's like, he spent the entire interview like making me justify
answer for your review scores. Oh my God, that's wild.
That's wild. Okay, but good or memorable interview stories. I'll say Yeah, I worked at a company where we had a really terrible, toxic boss that was protected by HR, and so we had a lot of people, and we spent too much time not doing the work, and a lot of time trying to protect each other from the chaos. And then they brought in somebody at one point for like a management position in the marketing org. But sort of with the sense of like, oh, the culture's bad and this person's going to help us fix it. And so everybody's stuff was like, everybody got very real. In our interviews, people will just like, here's a situation. It's like, how do we deal with this? And this person never talked about, oh, this is what I do in my job or whatever. She was just like consoling us, like, okay, well, and she just like told us how we would improve life. And it was the most human set of conversations you could have. And it was like this lifeline, who then didn't accept the job. So we were all heartbroken.
You're like, well, I mean, I guess that's not that surprising, but what a
Yeah,
bummer.
that one's really memorable. Um, I think the ones that usually tend to like I've never had like super crazy interviews. I mean, I've had very unprofessional interviews, right? Not that I want you to wear a suit and tie, but I've had just people
Yeah.
actually be like rude in interviews, which I'm like, oh, that's a weird thing to start off with, but okay.
Wow.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I think the ones that usually stand out are that they're personable because, you know, everybody's going to have like a list of stuff they've done on their resume and anybody can say, I did this or I did that. But it's like when you can tell a story in a human way, like that's how we learn, right? You think about it, you don't go read a novel and have it just be like this happened, this happened, this happened, right? You're reading, it's told in a way that is a story. And so I think the other piece of advice and the thing that will help you stand out is everybody can say the same piece of info. So, Joe, you're a community manager. You can say, hey, I took a company that basically didn't have any community or social media presence, and I built Discord and this, and we got this result. But there's going to be 10 other people interviewing that are all going to have that same story. So, how can Joe tell that story, right? Where it's actually a story, right, of something, right? And then it feels personal, and you hear the struggle, and your stories start with, right, there's a conflict, right? So what is the issue, right? Pose the issue in a way that's relatable. So I worked on a game where I came in and the previous community manager had really done a poor job. He basically allowed a lot of toxic people in the community, and we chased off a bunch of actually good players who then told other people that it was a bad space. And then that toxic person actually left, but the stink of them has stayed there. And so my job, even though I was hired just to like build up the Discord, my first job was how do I repair that, right? So now you set the conflict and the issue, but in a way that's like, oh, that's a real situation that I could see happening, right?
100%.
That's better
Absolutely.
than saying I was brought in and to fix a Discord and I did, right? And then what are the challenges along the way? Again, putting like the actual story there, that will help you a lot. And if you love the company you're applying for, do the research, right? So if
Mm.
again, I'll continue to use community manager, right,
Yeah,
as
yeah,
you.
sure.
But if you're like, this is my dream job, right? Like I love this game. So I love Shadow Complex. They're going to make Shadow Complex 2. Sorry, they're not. But imagine you were going for that job,
Hypothetically,
maybe a
guys,
community manager.
Shadow
Yeah,
Complex fans, calm down, everybody.
yeah.
This is a hypothetical.
Yeah, they're looking for a community manager. I love this. I can't wait. I really want this job. So the first thing I would do, right, is forget what questions they're going to ask. I would be in their socials. I would look at their community. I would understand it. I would make my own assessment, right? Because at the end of the day, you're going to have to give them insight into what can be improved. And so I'd have that in my mind and I would definitely utilize that. So even if you don't directly say like, I noticed your Discord kind of sucks. What are the things about their Discord that could be improved? And do you have stories from your past experience of how you improve that? Because if you tell that in a way that they mentally in their own head are like, oh my gosh, that's exactly like us, like
Yeah,
you're going to get that job. Like you're going
yeah.
to get that job.
So as we wrap things up here,
Yep.
I want to make sure to ask you the big sort of two-part question that I like to ask everybody that's come on. I feel like I've somehow just developed this as part of the list of things that I want to ask, and so I'm going with it, right? But
Uh,
so it's a two-parter. First, what's a common mistake that you're noticing, or that you've noticed candidates making, that's holding them back from success? And second, what's your top piece of advice for people on how they improve what they're doing so far?
I mean, I think, and I know it's exhausting to do this, but I think having the same resume, or more importantly, the same interview answers for every company, that's the biggest mistake because the company is hiring you for them, right? And so if you don't relate any of your experience to the situation they're in, why hire you over someone else? You're going to get the
Mm-hmm.
edge, the advantage. And I think most people come in, I worry less about the resume. It's much more about when you talk about stuff, they just do the same answers. They tell their history, they tell their experience without relating at all to what the company needs to know. That's the biggest one, biggest failing. And then what was the second part?
Second part is just kind of the opposites. What's your top piece of advice for
Hmm.
people and how they can improve what they're currently doing?
Yeah, that's a great
Not
question.
knowing, of course,
So
what they are currently doing, but just in
yeah,
general.
yeah, and I definitely understand that there's some people who, are shy. Maybe they're awkward. Maybe, they're, have some other stuff that prevents them from being as sociable. But I do think making people go, oh, I want to work with this guy. Because my thing always, and even when I work with an agency, right, is just like, do I want to hear this person every day? Do I want to talk to them every day? And so, trying to find those moments where it's like I can go, oh, like I could talk to this person about that. Oh, I like that, or I like their personality, or what, like because that's at the end of the day, like we all got to be either in person or online relating to each other. And if I have to work long hours, whatever it is, have the stress, like I just want to be, oh, at least I'm not annoyed by this person that I'm going to talk to. So don't get focused on just like the mission of, uh, giving the numbers and all that stuff and the case studies or whatever. It's like you're selling your personality and how does this personality feel to the other person? And you don't want to be different. So I'm a very loose, funny person. And I don't go into any interviews pretending to be buttoned up. I'm just like, that ain't me. And if that doesn't work for you, like I would be miserable here anyway.
Yeah.
So like I'm gonna crack jokes and I'm gonna take it lightly, but that's just like who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And you're either gonna if you like that, then I'm not gonna be like anybody else you talk to, and that's a good thing for me. If you
Yeah,
don't like
absolutely.
that, you would fire me eventually anyway because you'd
Yeah.
be annoyed, right, by me.
That's a good example of some things. Sometimes it's better to put yourself out there and just sort of be transparently who
Yeah.
you are rather than pretend to be what you think they want, because it's just going to end up, even if you get it right and you get the job, that there's a good chance that that's not sustainable, you know?
Yeah, and I would
Yeah.
say like communication wise, so maybe you say, "Hey, I'm a shy person. I'm an introvert, or I don't like having live conversations." But that's great because one of the questions I would ask then in the interview is like, "Hey, like I'm not really that comfortable like speaking out in big crowds. Like, what other ways do you allow people to give feedback or talk besides just having to stand up in front of everybody and do it?" Because it also tell you something about the company. The company, you might have a boss who's just like, eh, you just suck it up, and it's like elementary school all over again. But some will be like, oh, I appreciate that, like, because now you're putting it on the manager to tell you what they do, and maybe their process is like, it's like, yeah, I'm very aware of this, so like, I send something before we have a meeting so people want to ask questions, and then like I'll let people have like I stay online like in a cubicle or whatever. And like people can come and just talk to me one on one if they have a follow up about it or something, whatever they do. But be real with who you are, because not everybody's the life of the party. But you want to make sure that you can do your job effectively, right?
Yeah, and again, you're interviewing these companies too. I think
Yeah,
that's a really common thing that we all forget is you're the person looking for a job, and yeah, there feels like some level of, I don't like the word desperation because that's very very loaded, but you know what I mean. Like you feel like
yeah,
you're the one that needs them. That's not always the case, and so I think that going into interviews with a really clear idea that I need them, they need someone, or not even I need them, but I need someone, they need someone. Let's see if this fits. And it's kind of like going on a date. I mean, you wouldn't go on a date. Well, a lot of people wouldn't go on a date and pretend to be someone completely different than who you are, because that's going to obviously come back to bite you later, right? And I think it's the same thing. Of course, I'm saying that as a guy that I haven't dated in 20 something years now, but I remember that much at least. Cool, man. Hilary, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. This is every bit as interesting and awesome as I expected it to be. So thank you again, man. I have to get you on again one of these days. Really appreciate it.
well, man, it was fun, and good luck to everybody out there who's looking for something. I hope you guys land your dream jobs. someday soon, hopefully the industry bounces back.
Absolutely. Thanks again, man. Talk to you soon.
All right. Take care, man.
All right, guys, that's going to do it for this one. Thank you again so much for listening. Big thanks, of course, to my guest in this episode, Hilary Goldstein. Reach out to Hilary on LinkedIn, connect with him there. Great, knowledgeable guy. Again, just really good person to know. Above and beyond that, make sure to connect with me and the show on LinkedIn. You can just search my name, Joe King, to connect with me, and search the show's name, Game Industry Job Hunt, to follow the page there. And let's see, I think that's it. Leave us a review. Keep pushing. Best of luck on everything you have going on this week, and we'll talk to you soon.